Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey deep into the shadowed heart of Ontario, a land of forgotten corners, isolated small towns, endless wilderness, and places where help does not reach, to uncover 7 of the most disturbing and terrifying true horror stories ever reported from these quiet communities. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Ontario, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Ethan Miller, and this happened when I was 27 after I moved to a small town in northern Ontario to escape my past. I wasn't running from the law or anything dramatic like that. I was running from noise, from people, and from the constant feeling that my life was already collapsing in on itself. Maple Hollow felt perfect. Quiet streets, polite neighbors, and forests so thick they swallowed sound. The house I rented sat at the very end of the road. Locals called it the last light because it was the final porch lamp before the forest began. I thought it was poetic. I didn't know it was a warning. On my first night there, the silence felt heavy, almost physical. No traffic, no wind. Just my own breathing and the faint creak of an old house settling. Then, sometime after midnight, I heard something that didn't belong. Footsteps. Not outside. Inside the house. I froze at the top of the stairs, every muscle locked, listening. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, moving across the living room below me. Each step ended with a soft, dragging sound, like someone pulling their heel instead of lifting it. I told myself it had to be the house settling, old wood expanding in the cold. But houses don't change direction mid-step. I leaned over the railing and peered into the darkness. The living room was exactly as I'd left it. Couch against the wall, packed boxes stacked near the fireplace, my jacket draped over a chair. Then the jacket moved. It slid, just slightly, as if brushed by an unseen hand. My heart started pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. I whispered out a weak, "Hello?" and instantly regretted it. The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed felt intentional, like whatever was down there was listening now. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. Slow. Wet. Right below the stairs. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed with my back against the wall, gripping a heavy flashlight until my hand cramped. Every few minutes, the floor downstairs would creak, not randomly, but rhythmically, like pacing. Whatever was moving down there never came upstairs, yet it never left either. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. At dawn, the sound stopped. I finally worked up the courage to go downstairs. The front door was still locked. The windows were shut. Nothing was broken or disturbed, except the air. It smelled wrong, damp and metallic, like a basement that hadn't been opened in years. Later that morning, I asked my nearest neighbor, an older man named Graham, if anyone had ever broken into the house before. His face tightened instantly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked me, very carefully, if I'd heard footsteps at night. When I nodded, he swallowed hard and said, Then it started again. Graham invited me onto his porch, lowering his voice even though no one else was around. He told me the house had been empty for nearly 10 years. The previous tenant, a woman named Marianne Holt, vanished without a trace. No signs of struggle, no packed bags, just gone. What made the case strange was that neighbors kept reporting movement inside the house weeks after she disappeared. Lights turning on. Footsteps, breathing, The police chalked it up to pranksters and squatters. Eventually, the report stopped. Graham looked me straight in the eye and said, "They always stop until someone new moves in." That night, I tried to leave. My car wouldn't start. The battery was dead, even though it was brand new. I told myself I'd deal with it in the morning. But around 2:13 a.m., the footsteps returned, this time closer. They reached the bottom of the stairs and began climbing. One step at a time, I stood frozen at the top of the stairs, watching the darkness below slowly rise toward me. Each step creaked under invisible weight, louder than before, as if whatever was climbing wanted me to hear it. I backed into my bedroom and shut the door, locking it with shaking hands. Almost immediately, something pressed against the other side. The door bowed inward slightly, not enough to break, just enough to show strength. Then came the whispering. It wasn't words at first, just breath brushing against wood, sliding through the cracks. Slowly, sounds formed, broken and strained, like a voice that hadn't been used in years. I caught my own name. I had never told anyone in town my full name. The pressure vanished suddenly. The footsteps retreated down the stairs, fast this time, almost excited. A moment later, the basement door slammed shut with a force that rattled the entire house. I stayed locked inside my room until sunrise, knowing one thing for certain: whatever was in that house knew I was there for a reason. By morning, I was desperate. I called a mechanic from the nearest town, but he never showed up. When I tried my phone again, there was no signal at all. The house felt different in daylight, too quiet, like it was listening. I decided to check the basement, even though every instinct screamed not to. The basement door was open. Cold air poured out, carrying that same metallic smell, stronger now. The stairs descended into pitch darkness, and halfway down, I noticed something carved into the wooden wall. Names. Dozens of them. Scratched deep, uneven, desperate. Some were crossed out, others weren't. At the very bottom, written larger than the rest, was Marianne Holt. Behind me, the basement door slammed shut. The lights went out instantly. In the darkness, something shifted at the bottom of the stairs. I felt a presence so close I could feel its breath against my neck. And then it whispered, clearly this time. "You stay." I don't remember how I got out of the basement. One moment, I was standing in complete darkness with that breath on my neck. And the next, I was sprawled on the living room floor, gasping like I'd been underwater. The basement door was shut again, sealed tight, as if it had never opened at all. But the house wasn't done. That evening, the whispering spread. It didn't come from one place anymore. It seeped through the walls, the vents, the floorboards beneath my feet. Different voices overlapped, men, women, even a child. All of them begging, warning, pleading. They talked about staying quiet, about not fighting, about how resistance only made it worse. I realized then that the names in the basement weren't victims. They were occupants. When night fell, the footsteps returned, heavier than ever. This time, they didn't stop at the stairs. They moved down the hallway, stopping outside my bedroom door, lingering there for hours, as if waiting for permission or surrender. I finally understood the truth sometime after midnight. The house didn't hunt people. It convinced them to stay. It wore them down slowly, replacing fear with familiarity, terror with belonging. That was why no bodies were ever found. They didn't die, they joined it. The whispers changed tone. They stopped begging and started reassuring me, telling me how peaceful it was once you stopped fighting, how quiet the nights became when you no longer needed sleep. I felt something tug at my thoughts, smoothing the edges of my panic, inviting me to let go. That scared me more than the footsteps ever had. With the last of my strength, I smashed a window and climbed out into the snow, barefoot and bleeding. I ran until my lungs burned and my vision blurred. I don't remember collapsing, only waking up days later in a hospital miles away. The house was demolished a month later. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear footsteps. Not in my house, but in my head. The doctors told me I'd been found nearly 5 kilometers from Maple Hollow, collapsed in a snowbank along a service road that rarely saw traffic. I had severe frostbite on my feet, dehydration, and scratches all over my arms that I couldn't explain. When the police asked me what happened, I tried to tell them everything. The footsteps, the voices, the basement, the names. They listened politely, but I could see it in their eyes. They'd already decided I was another stressed outsider who'd cracked under isolation. One officer quietly mentioned that the house had been empty for years and that no one named Marianne Holt had ever been officially registered at that address. That night in the hospital, I dreamed of the house. Not the way it really was, but warm, lit, inviting. I dreamed I was standing at the top of the stairs while voices below called my name gently, telling me I'd forgotten something important. When I woke up, my heart was racing, and my room smelled faintly of damp wood and cold air. The smell followed me for weeks. I left Ontario not long after I was discharged. I changed cities, jobs, even my phone number. I did everything I could to erase Maple Hollow from my life. For a while, it worked. The dreams faded. The whispers stopped. I convinced myself the house was gone, burned out of existence, along with whatever lived inside it. Then, last winter, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed a freshly built house at the end of a familiar road. Snow piled high around it, a warm porch light glowing against the dark forest. On the back, written in the same uneven scratches I'd seen in the basement, were 3 words. The light is on. I still don't know who sent it. But some nights, when my own house is quiet and the world feels too still, I swear I hear footsteps pacing just beyond my bedroom door. Waiting, patient, for me to come home. My name is Lucas Harding, and this happened when I was 34, after I took a temporary job maintaining docks near Cedar Lake in rural Ontario. I was fresh off a divorce, broke, and desperate for quiet. The town was small enough that everyone noticed a new face, but not curious enough to ask too many questions. Cedar Lake was beautiful in a bleak kind of way. Dark water, thick tree lines, fog that rolled in without warning and swallowed the shoreline whole. Locals avoided the water after sunset, which I assumed was superstition mixed with cold temperatures. My cabin sat close to the lake, close enough that I could hear water lapping against the dock at night. The first evening, I heard something else too. Faint voices drifting up through the fog. They sounded distant, muffled, like people talking underwater. I laughed it off. Lakes echo. Sound travels strangely over water. That's what I told myself, until the voices started saying my name. The voices came back every night after that, always just after midnight. They never shouted. They never whispered either. They spoke calmly, evenly, as if having a polite conversation just beneath the surface of the lake. When I stepped onto the dock, the water would ripple gently even when there was no wind. The strange thing was the tone. They didn't sound threatening. They sounded familiar. On the 3rd night, I mentioned it to Elaine. the woman who ran the general store. Her smile vanished the moment I said voices. She told me the lake was deep, far deeper than it should be, and that people had drowned there long before the town existed. When I asked if anyone had ever heard things coming from the water, she shook her head too quickly and told me never to go near the dock at night. That same night, the fog rolled in thicker than ever. I stood by my window, watching the lake disappear inch by inch. Then I heard knocking. Not at my door. From beneath the dock, I stood frozen at the window, staring at the dock as the knocking repeated, slow, deliberate, and impossibly hollow. It sounded like wood striking wood, but muffled, as if the sound had to push through water before reaching my ears. My first instinct was that someone had fallen in and was trying to get my attention. That thought alone was enough to pull me outside, barefoot and shaking, flashlight clenched tight. The beam cut through the fog in short, useless bursts. When it hit the dock, I saw ripples spreading outward in perfect circles. Something was moving beneath the surface. I called out, asking if anyone needed help. The knocking stopped immediately. Then the voices rose together. They weren't saying my name anymore. They were counting. Slowly. One number at a time. Each word bubbled up through the water, distorted but clear enough to understand. When they reached 10, the lake went completely still. No ripples. No sound. Just black, glassy water reflecting my own terrified face back at me. I ran inside and locked the door. Sleep never came. The next morning, I found wet footprints leading from the edge of the lake to the base of my cabin steps. They weren't human. The impressions were too long, the toes stretched and uneven, as if whatever made them had tried to imitate a human foot without fully understanding how one worked. Halfway up the steps, the prints stopped. I took photos and drove straight into town. The local sheriff barely glanced at them before telling me they were probably made by a moose or a bear. His voice was calm, practiced, and dishonest. Elaine wouldn't look at the pictures at all. She just whispered that the lake collects people, and always had. That afternoon, I learned the truth by accident. While repairing a damaged section of dock, my tool struck something solid beneath the water. Not a rock, a metal ladder. It led straight down into the lake, bolted there intentionally. Waiting, I stared at the ladder for a long time before pulling it free of the water. It was old, rusted, and heavy, clearly not something that had drifted there by accident. The rungs were worn smooth in places, as if countless hands had gripped them over the years. That realization made my stomach turn. When I asked around town about it, no one claimed responsibility. In fact, most people denied its existence altogether. One man at the diner told me Cedar Lake had never had a swimming area, never allowed diving, never needed a ladder. His voice shook when he said it, and his eyes darted toward the window facing the water. That night, the voices changed again. They didn't come from beneath the dock anymore. They came from the ladder itself. I heard water dripping rhythmically, each drop followed by a soft word. Names this time. Dozens of them. Spoken gently, lovingly, like a roll call. When they reached the last name, the ladder shifted on its own and slid back into the lake, and the voices laughed. I didn't sleep. I sat by the window with a knife in my hand, watching the fog thicken until the lake disappeared completely. Somewhere out there, beneath the surface, I could hear movement. Slow, methodical, like people climbing. Just before dawn, the voices rose in unison and called my name again. This time, they weren't asking. They were reminding me. I felt a pull in my chest, a strange pressure behind my eyes, like the lake was tugging on something inside me. Memories I didn't recognize surfaced. Faces I'd never seen, hands gripping metal rungs, cold water closing over my head. For a terrifying moment, I knew exactly how deep Cedar Lake was, and how many people were still down there. I snapped out of it when something banged hard against the side of the cabin. The walls shuddered. Water streamed down the windows as if the lake itself was trying to get inside. When the sun finally rose, the dock was gone. Only calm water remained. Waiting. I didn't return to the dock for weeks. Instead, I tried to keep busy, fixing the cabin, exploring the woods, and talking to the few townspeople willing to engage. But the voices never left. They seeped into my dreams, drifting through the fog even when I slept. Each night they called more names, and each night one or two sounded painfully familiar, like friends I had lost or classmates I hadn't spoken to in years. One night, I woke to find the ladder resting on my front porch. Not leaning against anything, just standing upright in the snow as if someone had carried it there. I didn't touch it. I didn't dare. The air around it was heavier, colder, filled with that same metallic, damp smell from the lake. A voice, faint but urgent, whispered right behind my ear. "Come down. We've been waiting." I spun around. No one was there. And then I heard the footsteps on the roof. I knew I had to leave. Packing my things in a hurry, I avoided the lake entirely, careful to lock doors and close windows. But as I loaded my car, I realized the voices had followed me outside. The air was thick with whispering, and names spilled from every direction, overlapping in an impossible harmony. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. I got in my car and tried to start it. Nothing. No engine, no click. Just a low hum, almost like someone whispering beneath the hood. Panic took over. I ripped open the door and ran toward the main road, hoping to flag down a passing car. That night, from the relative safety of a lit diner, I watched Cedar Lake through the fog. The dock had reappeared. The ladder jutted out at a strange angle, half submerged, as if inviting me. I knew then that the lake didn't just collect people. It waited for them. And it remembered. I left Ontario the next morning without looking back. I told myself I'd escape the voices, the ladder, and the lake. But the truth was worse. They had followed me. Every quiet moment, I could hear them whispering in my ears, softly calling my name, counting, repeating names I didn't recognize. My dreams became more vivid. I was climbing the ladder, step by step, into water that seemed bottomless. Faces reached for me, hands cold as ice, yet gentle, as if welcoming me home. I tried to convince myself it was stress, guilt, grief from my failed marriage, or a trick of my imagination. But when I called my old neighbor Elaine from a distance, she answered in a voice I didn't recognize. It sounded layered, almost as if many people were speaking at once, and all she said was, "He remembers you." I hung up. My hands were shaking. Cedar Lake wasn't over. And it never would be. Years passed. I moved cities multiple times, tried to forget, tried to live a normal life. But the voices never stopped. On quiet nights, I hear soft knocks on my windows. Sometimes they count, 1, 2, 3, always in the same calm, deliberate rhythm. Occasionally, I catch the faint smell of damp water and rust, the exact smell of Cedar Lake. A month ago, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a small, rusted piece of ladder rung, cold to the touch, worn smooth as if someone or something had climbed it countless times. Along with it, a note scribbled in uneven, watery handwriting. "We're still waiting. The water remembers you." I haven't gone near any lakes since. But when I close my eyes, I feel the pull, the tug at my chest, the memory of fingers brushing my own. Cedar Lake isn't just a lake. It's alive. And I belong to it now, whether I want to or not. My name is Samantha Reed, and this happened when I was 26. I had taken a seasonal job as a forest ranger near Pinebrook Hollow in northern Ontario, a place the locals described with a nervous smile as quiet. Sometimes too quiet. I didn't realize what they meant at the time. Pinebrook Hollow was picturesque in the daytime, dense pine forests, crystal clear creeks, and cabins tucked along hidden paths. But when night fell, the silence became oppressive. No wind rustled the trees. No owls hooted. Just stillness thick and heavy, pressing against your ears and chest. On my second night at the ranger station, I heard something I shouldn't have. A scream, high-pitched and sharp, echoed through the forest. But it didn't sound like any animal. It was human. I grabbed my flashlight and ran toward the sound, heart pounding, thinking someone might be hurt. By the time I reached the edge of the clearing, everything was gone. The scream, the source. Nothing remained except the trees swaying in an unnatural calm. The next day, I asked the nearest cabin owners if they had heard anything. They exchanged uneasy glances and shook their heads. One older man muttered that Pinebrook Hollow had a history. People disappearing, often without a trace, especially during the dead of night. The locals whispered about the hollow's hunger, though no one would elaborate. I tried to brush it off as superstition. Yet, that evening, the sensation returned. While walking the perimeter of my station, I heard faint footsteps following me. I turned sharply, but nothing was there. Just the windless trees, their needles glinting faintly under the moonlight. Then I heard breathing. Not mine. Slow, deliberate, almost synchronized with my own heartbeat. It seemed to circle me, weaving between the trunks, always just out of sight. I ran back to the ranger station, bolting the door behind me. But even inside, I couldn't escape it. The breathing continued, a sinister reminder that I was not alone, and that Pinebrook Hollow had already noticed me. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the wooden floor, every whisper of wind through the station's gaps made me flinch. Around midnight, I heard it again. Soft footsteps outside, moving in a circle just beyond the walls. I grabbed my flashlight and peered out the window, but the clearing was empty. Only shadows stretched across the snow-dusted ground, shifting unnaturally. I tried to tell myself I was imagining things. Pinebrook Hollow had a reputation for isolation and weird sounds, I reminded myself. But then the whispers started. Low, murmuring voices that weren't coming from anywhere visible, speaking in fragmented words I couldn't fully understand. One word repeated over and over. Home. Panic surged. I grabbed my radio, calling for anyone on duty nearby. Only static answered. Then I realized something horrifying. The static wasn't just noise. Beneath it I could hear them, the whispers, the breathing, the footsteps, moving closer with each second, as if the forest itself was approaching me. The next morning, I found footprints leading from the edge of the clearing to the dense forest beyond. They weren't human. Some were too long, some too narrow, and many looked like they had been distorted by some heavy pressure on the ground. Half of them vanished into thick underbrush, as if the forest had swallowed them whole. I decided to follow them, against every instinct screaming at me to stay. The deeper I went, the darker it became, even under full daylight. Trees seemed unnaturally close together, branches blocking light, twisting overhead like fingers. The air felt thick, almost viscous, pressing against my chest. Suddenly, the footprints stopped. In the middle of a small clearing stood a tree unlike the others. A massive pine, its trunk twisted and gnarled, with deep grooves carved into the bark. As I approached, I realized the grooves formed shapes. Faces, screaming, pleading, frozen in eternal horror. A whisper hissed behind me. "Welcome home." I froze, staring at the tree, my heart hammering. The carved faces seemed almost alive, twisting slightly in the dappled light, their mouths opening and closing in silent screams. The whisper followed me, circling my head, soft and coaxing. "Come closer. Stay with us." Panic surged. I stumbled backward, tripping over roots and falling into the snow. When I looked up, the clearing had changed. The footprints were everywhere now, leading toward the tree from multiple directions, some fresh, some older, as if people had been drawn here for years. And the forest beyond seemed endless, darkening unnaturally, as though it didn't obey the rules of daylight. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket, snow soaked my boots, but the whispering followed, louder now, insistent, almost mocking. I burst out of the woods onto a narrow dirt road, gasping, praying someone would see me. But the road was empty. The silence of the hollow swallowed me, and I realized the forest wasn't just nearby. It was alive, and it remembered everyone who entered. That night, back at the ranger station, I tried to convince myself it had been hallucination, exhaustion, or stress. But the whispers didn't stop. They seeped through the walls, through the vents, through the very floorboards. I could hear them breathing outside my window, pacing back and forth. And sometimes, faintly, I could make out names. People who had vanished years before, some who weren't even registered in the town's records. I tried leaving the cabin, but every time I stepped outside, the forest seemed to stretch farther, swallowing the road, erasing landmarks I knew were there. I felt a tug, a pull in my chest, as though the forest itself was drawing me back toward the gnarled pine, toward the carved faces that whispered promises of safety, of belonging. By the third night, I could no longer sleep. Every shadow became a presence. Every rustle of wind through the trees became a step approaching me. Pinebrook Hollow was alive, and it was patient, waiting. And it wanted me to stay forever. By the fourth night, I had barricaded myself inside the ranger station. I refused to step outside, yet the forest didn't care. The whispers grew louder, closer, like they were pressing through the walls. At one point, I swore I could hear footsteps on the roof, slow and measured, circling the building. Every instinct screamed that leaving was death. But staying was something worse. I tried calling for help, but every signal failed. The radio only produced static, and my phone showed no service. Then, through the static, a voice emerged. Not distorted, not faint. It was clear, and it said my name, calm and deliberate, with the familiarity of someone who had known me for years. A sudden knock on the door froze me. One, soft, then two, then three, matching the rhythm of the voices in the forest. I knew if I opened it, I'd be drawn in, never to return. But something inside me, terrified curiosity perhaps, made me inch closer. I didn't open the door. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the fog, revealing movement that shouldn't have been there. Shadows shifted unnaturally, stretching toward the cabin like dark hands. The whispering intensified, merging with the sound of branches snapping under weight that wasn't human. Then I saw them. Figures, pale and elongated, stepping silently between the trees, faces obscured by shadows, but unmistakably human. They moved with purpose, circling the station. One raised a hand, and the whispering changed, no longer calling names, but pleading. They wanted me to follow them, to return to the hollow, to belong. I ran to the radio one last time and tried to call for help. Static, then silence. The door shuddered under invisible force. I felt it, the pull in my chest again, stronger, insistent. I knew leaving the hollow alive meant defying something ancient and patient. And yet, I had no choice. Oh, I left the ranger station before dawn, running blindly through the forest, hoping to find the road leading out of Pine Brook Hollow. The fog clung to me, thick and suffocating, and every step felt heavier than the last. I could hear the whispers behind me, trailing, soft yet relentless. Names, laughter, promises of warmth and safety. But with a sharp undertone of menace. I stumbled into a clearing and saw something that stopped me cold. Dozens of footprints, all leading toward the gnarled pine, though I was nowhere near it moments before. The forest had shifted again, reshaping itself, trapping me inside a nightmare. I realized then that the hollow didn't just take people. It played with them, bending reality to ensure they never escaped its reach. I finally burst onto a service road I recognized. Cars passed, unaware of the horror behind them. But the whispers didn't stop. Even as I drove miles away, I could feel them tugging, insistent. The hollow remembered me. I eventually left Ontario and moved to a city hundreds of kilometers away. I told friends I'd gotten lost in the woods, nothing more. But the hollow followed me, in ways subtle and horrifying. At night, I hear faint whispers when the wind blows, familiar names I should never know. Occasionally, I dream of the gnarled pine, the carved faces, and the figures in the shadows waiting patiently. A month ago, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a small scrap of bark from the gnarled tree, etched with lines forming a face, screaming silently. Along with it, a single word: home. I haven't returned to Pine Brook Hollow since, but I can't stop thinking about it. Every quiet night, every rustle of trees, every shadow in my peripheral vision reminds me, the hollow is patient. It waits, and one day, it will call me back. My name is Ethan Miller, and this happened when I was 29. I had just moved to a small town in Ontario to take a job as a delivery driver. Most of my routes took me through quiet back roads, but one stood out: Black Pine Road. Locals avoided it at night, saying it was haunted, though no one could explain why. The road was narrow, flanked by dense forests, pine trees forming a dark tunnel that swallowed headlights and sound alike. The deeper I drove into it, the colder the air became. The trees seemed to lean in closer with every turn, shadows stretching unnaturally across the asphalt. On my first night delivering to a cabin at the end of the road, I noticed something odd. No matter how fast I drove, the road never seemed to end. Headlights reflected off nothing, trees repeating themselves like a loop. That's when I saw movement. Shadows flitting just beyond the edge of my lights, always at the periphery. And then, I heard whispers. The whispers weren't words I could understand. They were murmurs, half-formed phrases, sounds that seemed to mimic my own thoughts. I tried ignoring them, focusing on the road. But the longer I drove, the more insistent they became. I glanced in the rearview mirror and froze. Something was sitting in the back seat. At first, I thought it was a trick of the headlights, a shadow playing against the fabric. But it shifted, subtle, just enough to see the outline of a figure hunched over, watching me. My pulse spiked. I slammed on the brakes, but the figure vanished instantly. I parked on the side of the road, heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was my imagination. The wind through the pines picked up, carrying a faint metallic scent. And then I realized the whispers weren't coming from outside. They were coming from inside the car, echoing from the vents, the dashboard, even the seats. Something had followed me into Black Pine Road. I spent the next hour parked on the roadside, trembling, trying to calm my racing heart. Every sound of wind through the trees felt amplified, as if the forest itself were listening. I finally convinced myself to start the car and drive slowly, keeping my eyes glued to the road ahead. But the whispers continued, faintly echoing around me, almost conversational, almost mocking. As I reached a bend in the road, I noticed them. Figures standing just beyond the edge of the headlights, perfectly still. Tall, gaunt shapes, faces obscured in shadows, blending into the black pines. I slammed the brakes again. They didn't move. And then one of them tilted its head toward me, as if studying me. My pulse hit my ears. I gunned the engine, tires spinning over loose gravel. The figures didn't pursue, but the whispers grew louder, merging into a single chilling voice repeating, "Stay with us. Forever." I finally reached the cabin at the end of Black Pine Road, panting, drenched in sweat, and convinced I was overreacting. But the moment I stepped out of the car, the whispers stopped. Silence pressed against me so heavily I could feel my ears ringing. I looked at the cabin. It seemed ordinary, small, but the windows reflected movement that wasn't mine. Inside, the owner, an elderly man named Graham, greeted me with a stiff nod. I tried to make small talk, but he wouldn't answer my questions about the road. Instead, he motioned toward a map hanging on the wall. Black Pine Road was marked in red, labeled simply, "Do not enter after dark." Before I could ask why, the lights flickered violently. Shadows danced across the walls in impossible shapes, and the whispering returned, now coming from every corner of the cabin. I realized with horror that I hadn't left the road behind. It had followed me here. I spent the night in that cabin. But sleep was impossible. Every creak of the wooden floor, every whistle of the wind through cracks in the walls made me flinch. The whispers returned intermittently, circling me like a predator. They weren't asking or warning. They were observing, judging, reminding me I didn't belong. At one point, I heard footsteps approaching the front door. Slow, deliberate, uneven. I froze, clutching the blanket over my shoulders. The knob rattled slightly, then stopped. Nothing happened for a long, tense moment. Then a shadow moved past the frosted window beside the door. Tall, thin, impossible. It didn't look like it was walking. It glided, limbs bending in ways no human body should. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. My skin crawled as I realized the shadow wasn't alone. More appeared outside, silently surrounding the cabin, waiting. And then the whispers began to form words again. "Come outside, come play, stay forever." By morning, exhaustion and fear had hollowed me out. I tried convincing myself it was hallucination from too many night drives, too much isolation. But when I peeked out the window, the road seemed different. Black Pine Road stretched endlessly, longer than it should have, bending and twisting unnaturally into the trees. I packed quickly, careful not to look behind me. As I drove, the whispers returned, soft at first, then growing louder, following me even as the trees thinned. Every turn I took, the road seemed to curve back toward the forest. toward the cabin, toward the shadows that wanted me to stop, to stay. I caught glimpses of figures in the periphery, pale, faceless, moving impossibly fast between the trees. They weren't chasing, but their presence was suffocating, pressing against the car, the tires, even my heartbeat. By the time I reached the town proper, I realized something terrifying. Black Pine Road didn't release you willingly, and once it claimed your attention, it never truly let go. That night, I tried to sleep in my motel room, but the whispers didn't stop. They weren't confined to the road anymore. They followed me into the walls, the floor, the vents. Every shadow in the room seemed alive, stretching and twisting in impossible ways. I could feel their eyes on me, observing, waiting for me to slip. Unable to take it, I went outside, thinking the fresh air might help. But the moment I stepped into the night, the forest at the edge of town seemed to reach toward me, trees bending slightly as if acknowledging my presence. And then I saw movement. A pale figure standing at the tree line, perfectly still, staring. As I blinked, more joined it. Each one slightly taller, their heads tilted in the same unnatural angle. The whispers grew into a chant. "Stay, stay, join us." I realized with dread that Black Pine Road wasn't just a road. It was a predator, patient and intelligent, waiting for anyone who wandered too close. I couldn't stay. I tried to drive away, but the forest seemed to stretch farther than the road should allow. Every turn led me back toward the edge of the trees, toward the place where the shadows waited. I caught glimpses in the mirrors. Figures appearing and disappearing in the periphery, moving impossibly fast. Then the whispers changed. They weren't just voices, they were commands, forming words I couldn't ignore. Stop. Come back. Belong to us. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and I felt a pull, subtle but insistent, tugging me toward the darkness beyond the headlights. I slammed the brakes, shaking, hyperventilating. But the road stretched onward, bending unnaturally, guiding me back to where the forest wanted me. I realized the truth then. Black Pine Road didn't let anyone leave willingly. It claimed attention, demanded obedience, and tested resolve. And for anyone who wandered too close, it had a way of dragging them into the shadows, where they belonged. By the time I reached the edge of town, exhaustion and fear had hollowed me out. I wanted to tell myself I had escaped, that Black Pine Road was behind me. But the whispers never stopped. At every turn, I could hear them trailing, echoing through the car, through the vents, even in the beating of my own heart. Sometimes, when traffic was light, I glimpsed movement in the rearview mirror. Pale, elongated shapes standing among the trees at impossible angles. They didn't move toward me, but the awareness of their presence was enough. It pressed on me, a weight that grew heavier with every mile. I realized that the road didn't need to chase. Once it had marked you, once it had your attention, it didn't let go. The shadows were patient, cunning, waiting for the moment you grew tired, for the moment you stopped looking, for the moment you finally listened. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that moment could come sooner than I hoped. I moved to another province soon after, telling everyone I had simply lost my way on a dark road. But even hundreds of kilometers away, I feel the pull. Quiet nights bring whispers, soft and persistent, echoing through my apartment. Shadows at the edge of my vision twist unnaturally, and sometimes I wake to find subtle footprints on my balcony, snowless, as if someone has walked there from another world. A package arrived recently with no return address. Inside was a small, cracked piece of asphalt, darkened and rough, with faint tire marks and scratches that looked like clawed hands. A note scribbled in uneven handwriting read, "We are always waiting. Black Pine Road remembers you." I haven't driven at night since. I haven't dared follow a lonely road through the forest. But every night I feel the pull. And one day, the shadows of Black Pine Road will come to collect what belongs to them. My name is Liam Carter, and this happened when I was 24. I'd recently moved to a quiet town in Ontario, taking a job as a night shift security guard at a small industrial park. Most of my shifts were uneventful, but my route always took me past Maple Creek Bridge, a wooden bridge spanning a slow, dark creek. Locals avoided it after sunset, muttering about strange sounds and people vanishing, though no one would give details. The first night I passed the bridge, I noticed something unusual. Mist hovered low over the water, unnaturally thick, glowing faintly in my headlights. I slowed the car, trying to understand what I was seeing. Then I heard it, a soft, wet scraping sound coming from beneath the bridge, like nails dragged across wood. I got out to investigate. The mist clung to my boots, cold and damp. The scraping stopped abruptly, replaced by a faint whisper, almost a sigh. "Why are you here?" I froze. Heart racing, I stepped closer to the edge of the bridge. The wood beneath my feet groaned with every step, each sound amplified in the still night air. The whisper came again, this time clearer, almost pleading. "Don't leave. Stay." I spun around, half expecting someone to be behind me. But the road was empty. The mist swirled unnaturally, forming shapes that seemed vaguely human, then dissipating before I could focus on them. My rational mind told me it was fog, my imagination, the stress of late-night shifts. But every instinct screamed otherwise. I leaned over the railing to see the source of the sound. The water was calm, too calm, reflecting the bridge and the dark forest beyond. Then, suddenly, a pale hand broke the surface, long fingers curling upward, as if reaching for me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, tripping over my boots. I scrambled back to my car, slamming the door, but the whisper followed, faintly, almost laughing. "You shouldn't have come here." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what I saw. Every time I closed my eyes, the pale hand reappeared, breaking through the fog, reaching for me. The whispers had followed me home, echoing in my apartment, faint but persistent, like a low hum vibrating through the walls. Sleep was impossible. The next evening, I decided I needed to know the truth. I returned to Maple Creek Bridge, flashlight in hand, heart hammering. The fog had already begun to form over the creek, thicker this time, swirling in unnatural patterns. I peered over the railing, and the water looked darker than before, almost black, reflecting no light at all. Then I saw them. Faces, dozens of them, pale and twisted, pressing against the surface as if the water were a thin veil hiding a hidden world. And beneath their mouths, I could hear the whispers forming a single phrase. "Come. Join us." Forever. I stumbled back from the railing, my flashlight trembling in my hands. The whispers rose in volume, now surrounding me, coming from all directions. I spun around, but the road was empty, the bridge still, yet I felt their presence pressing in from every side. My rational mind screamed to leave, but a strange compulsion rooted me in place. The mist thickened suddenly, curling around my boots and ankles like icy fingers. Shapes formed within it, figures, faceless and pale, moving silently toward the center of the bridge. Their motions were unnatural, fluid, as if they weren't entirely bound by the rules of gravity or reality. I tried to run, but my feet felt heavy, stuck to the wet wooden planks. The whispers became words I could understand, soft but demanding. Stay. Never leave. Your soul belongs to the creek. Panic overtook me. I turned and ran as fast as I could, ignoring the splashes of mist that seemed to try and grab me. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the forest beyond the bridge. The whispers followed me the entire way, fading only when I was back on the main road. My chest heaved, my hands were shaking, and my mind raced with questions I didn't want answers to. Something lived in that creek, something patient and malevolent. I called the local police the next day, explaining what I had seen, but they only laughed nervously. They told me the bridge was old, notorious for fog and illusions at night, and that many people claimed to see things they imagined. I wanted to scream at them, to tell them it wasn't imagination. But deep down, I knew no one would believe the full truth. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every sound in my apartment, the drip of the faucet, the hum of the heater, sounded like whispers, teasing me. The memory of pale hands breaking the water's surface and the faceless figures haunted every corner of my mind. By the third night after my encounter, the whispers returned stronger than ever, as if they had grown impatient. They weren't confined to dreams anymore. They infiltrated my apartment, echoing from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I could feel cold mist brushing against my skin, soft but tangible, curling around my arms and legs. Something compelled me, I don't know if it was fear or curiosity, to return to the bridge. I drove back, heart hammering, the fog already forming over the creek as if it had been waiting. I stopped at the entrance, staring at the dark water below. Shapes moved beneath the surface, gliding unnaturally, their pale faces breaking through the mist like fragile glass. A whisper rose above all others. Join us. The mist thickened, swirling violently now, pressing toward me. Every instinct screamed to run, but I felt my body stiffen, drawn toward the bridge. I realized with absolute clarity that whatever haunted Maple Creek Bridge didn't just want attention, it wanted a new victim. I forced myself to back away from the bridge, stumbling over wet wooden planks. The whispers followed, now forming words in a cadence I couldn't resist. Your soul belongs to the creek. Come closer, forever. I spun, trying to leave, but the mist seemed to form walls around me, guiding me back to the center of the bridge. Shadows emerged from the fog, elongated, faceless figures moving silently, gliding over the water and across the planks. They didn't speak, didn't chase. They simply waited. I realized then that Maple Creek Bridge didn't need to physically take anyone. It fed on attention, fear, and curiosity. The moment someone acknowledged its presence, it began its subtle claim. I felt it pressing against me, tugging, as if my very heartbeat belonged to the creek. I backed up, heart racing, until the fog thinned slightly, giving me the illusion of escape. But deep down, I knew that the bridge had already marked me. Desperate, I ran off the bridge, plunging into the edge of the forest. Branches tore at my jacket, roots grabbed my feet, but I didn't stop. Behind me, the whispers rose in volume, echoing through the trees, circling me, almost laughing. Shapes moved in the fog, following, patient, relentless. I stumbled onto a dirt road, lungs burning, convinced I had escaped. For a moment, the whispers faded, leaving only silence and the crunch of gravel beneath my boots. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. The mist rolled in again, thicker this time, creeping across the road, carrying faint reflections of pale faces and twisted limbs. I realized something terrifying. The bridge didn't just haunt the place, it haunted me. Wherever I went, it followed. The creak, the mist, the whispers, they weren't confined to one spot. Maple Creek Bridge had a reach that extended far beyond its wooden planks, and the pull it exerted was growing stronger every night. Days passed, but the haunting didn't stop. Even in the safety of my apartment, I felt the pull of the bridge. Shadows lingered in the corners of rooms, twisting when I wasn't looking directly at them. Whispers came through my phone, my computer, even in the hum of the refrigerator. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the bridge, the black water, the pale hands reaching up, calling me back. I tried to rationalize it: stress, exhaustion, imagination. But the signs were everywhere. A package arrived with small splinters of wood from the bridge, a single word carved crudely into one piece: return. I knew then that Maple Creek Bridge didn't just exist in the town. It existed wherever attention lingered. It didn't need proximity, it needed focus. And every time I remembered, every time I thought about that night, it gained strength. The bridge was patient, and I wasn't free. A week later, I couldn't resist the compulsion any longer. I drove back toward Maple Creek Bridge, hoping to confront whatever was waiting. The closer I got, the thicker the fog became, curling along the asphalt like icy fingers. I slowed to a crawl, headlights barely piercing the dense mist. When I reached the bridge, the water beneath was black and still, reflecting no light at all. Pale figures moved slowly beneath the surface, faces pressed close to the water like glass, hands reaching upward in silent beckoning. The whispers returned, louder, clearer, repeating the same phrase I'd heard since that first night. Stay. Join us, forever. I stepped back, heart pounding, and felt the tug in my chest, the irresistible pull toward the bridge and its dark water. I ran, leaving my car behind, not daring to look back. Even now, miles away, I hear it. Soft whispers on quiet nights, calling me back. Maple Creek Bridge waits, and it will never forget. My name is Sophie Lane, and this happened when I was 26. I had rented a small cabin near Hollow Creek for a weekend getaway with friends. It was secluded, surrounded by dense forest, and the locals warned us not to wander at night. Of course, we laughed it off. The first evening was peaceful enough. Crackling fire, the smell of pine, the quiet rush of the creek nearby. But as night fell, an eerie stillness settled over the forest. The wind ceased, the water stilled, and every sound seemed amplified. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, even our own breathing. Around midnight, I woke to a blood-curdling scream. It was distant, yet so sharp it pierced through the walls of the cabin. My friends were asleep, oblivious, but I could hear it again. A guttural, agonized sound, like someone or something was trapped and begging for release. Curiosity and fear tangled inside me. I had to know where it came from. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, heart hammering, the air crisp and unnervingly silent. The scream echoed again, closer now, coming from the direction of the creek. I tried calling my friends, but they were asleep. My voice seemed swallowed by the night. The creek was narrow and shallow, but as I approached, I saw something impossible. Footprints in the mud, bare, pale, unnaturally long, leading into the forest. They were too large to be human, and they glistened in the moonlight, wet and fresh. I followed them cautiously, the flashlight trembling in my grip. Every step deeper into the trees made the shadows feel heavier, almost sentient. Then, the whispering began, soft at first, almost imperceptible like wind through branches. But it grew louder, forming words I could barely comprehend. "Why are you here? Stay. Stay." Panic surged through me. I wanted to turn back, but an inexplicable force pushed me forward into the heart of Hollow Creek's forest. The deeper I went, the thicker the shadows became, almost tangible, wrapping around me like cold hands. The creek beside me was silent now, its water unnaturally still, reflecting the pale moonlight like a black mirror. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, forming words I could almost understand. "Stay. Join us. You belong here." I froze, my flashlight flickering. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Tall, thin shapes slipping silently between the trees, faces pale and faceless. Every instinct screamed to run, but I felt rooted in place, as if something unseen had a grip on my body. Suddenly, the screaming returned, closer, coming from a clearing just ahead. The sound was raw, desperate, and filled with unimaginable anguish. I stumbled toward it, unable to stop, and when I reached the clearing, I realized the source wasn't human. The figure in the moonlight was elongated, distorted, its limbs bent at impossible angles, staring at me with hollow eyes. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, tripping over roots and rocks, barely keeping my flashlight steady. The figure didn't move, but the whispering intensified, now surrounding me from all directions, echoing through the trees. "You cannot leave. You belong here." Panic set in. I turned to run back toward the cabin, but the forest seemed to have changed. Paths that were familiar twisted unnaturally, leading me deeper into darkness. Shadows moved at the edges of my vision, gliding across tree trunks, vanishing when I tried to focus on them. Then the scream returned, right beside me, close enough to feel the vibration in my chest. A hand, pale and elongated, brushed against my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Only the mist, curling and thickening, carrying whispers that promised torment if I didn't comply. I realized in that moment that Hollow Creek Cabin was not just haunted. The forest itself was alive, watching and waiting for its next victim. I ran blindly through the forest, branches scratching my arms and face, roots trying to trip me at every step. The whispers followed relentlessly, wrapping around my mind, teasing me, promising I couldn't escape. The creek's water reflected moonlight in flashes, revealing pale, twisted faces lurking just beneath the surface. I stumbled again and fell, the cold mud seeping into my clothes. I tried to scream, to call for help, but my voice sounded weak and distant, as if the forest was swallowing it. Then I noticed them. Figures, thin and pale, emerging from the mist, their heads tilted unnaturally, limbs bending in impossible ways. They didn't run. They glided silently toward me, their presence suffocating. Somewhere in the distance, the cabin stood silent, its windows dark, but the pull of Hollow Creek was stronger. I realized then that the forest wasn't trying to kill me. It wanted to claim me, to fold me into its whispers, its shadows, its eternal scream. Finally, I stumbled into a small clearing, chest heaving, lungs burning. I thought I might have lost them, that I had escaped the relentless forest. But the whispers intensified, not behind me, but inside my mind now. Every thought, every heartbeat was accompanied by a soft, insistent voice. "Come back. You belong here." I looked up, and through the mist, the cabin appeared. Not where I remembered it, but closer, looming impossibly, windows glowing faintly with an eerie light. Shapes moved behind the glass, pale and faceless, pressing against it, reaching outward as if aware of me. I wanted to turn away, to run into the forest, but something paralyzed me. The forest seemed to pulse, the ground beneath me vibrating faintly, drawing me toward the cabin. I realized with terror that Hollow Creek Cabin didn't just exist in space. It existed in my mind, in my fear, and it had already marked me as its next victim. I couldn't resist any longer. Step by step, I moved toward the cabin, my flashlight barely piercing the thick mist. The whispers swirled around me, twisting words into my mind. Stay. Belong. Forever. The figures at the edge of the clearing moved closer, gliding over the wet ground without sound. Their faceless heads tilted in unison, as if analyzing me, judging me. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my feet felt heavy, as if rooted to the forest floor. I reached the cabin's porch, the boards creaking under my weight. Inside, the faint outlines of shadows shifted unnaturally, moving independently of any human shape. The whispers grew louder, almost tangible, urging me to enter. I realized then that the cabin wasn't just a place, it was alive, feeding on fear, calling its victims willingly into its grasp. My hands trembled as I reached for the door handle. Beyond it waited whatever had haunted Hollow Creek for decades. Patient, relentless, and hungry. I opened the door, the hinges groaning in protest, and the warmth of the cabin was gone, replaced by an icy chill that seeped into my bones. Inside, the shadows moved independently, stretching across the floor and walls, forming humanoid shapes with limbs bent at impossible angles. The whispers rose to a crescendo, echoing from every corner. You cannot leave. You belong to Hollow Creek. I tried to step back, but the door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. The flashlight flickered and died, leaving me in total darkness. The only light came from the mist seeping in through the cracks, illuminating pale faces that pressed close to the walls, their hands reaching out. I stumbled blindly through the cabin, trying to find an exit, but the layout had changed. Rooms twisted impossibly, doors leading to nowhere, hallways stretching beyond reason. I realized with terror that the cabin wasn't just haunted, it was a trap, a labyrinth designed to consume anyone who dared enter. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in the silence, each thump drowned out by the whispers that seemed to come from inside my skull. The cabin had transformed into something alive, twisting around me, corridors bending in impossible angles. Every turn revealed more faceless figures, lurking in the shadows, pressing closer, reaching for me with pale, elongated hands. I stumbled into a room at the far end, and there it was, the source of the screams. A figure, larger than any human, hunched over, its limbs bending grotesquely, head twisting unnaturally to face me. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, echoing through my mind as if it weren't just a sound, but a force, pulling me in. I realized then that Hollow Creek Cabin didn't just haunt the living. It trapped their souls. The whispers became words I couldn't resist. Stay. Forever. Belong to us. I felt my body stiffen, and fear turned to icy paralysis. I don't know how long I remained there, paralyzed, as the whispers grew louder, wrapping around me like chains. My mind screamed to fight, but it was no use. The cabin was alive, a predator, and I was already marked. The pale figures circled me, gliding over warped floors, faces pressed close, mouths opening and closing in silent mockery. Somehow, I found strength and bolted toward the nearest exit, crashing through a door that led me outside. The mist had thickened into an almost solid wall, obscuring everything. I ran blindly through the forest, branches slapping my face, mud clinging to my shoes. Behind me, I could hear faint whispers still, calling my name, promising I would return. When I finally reached my car and drove away, the screams faded, but they never truly left. Even now, in the safety of my home, hundreds of miles away, I hear them sometimes. Soft, insistent, haunting. Hollow Creek Cabin waits, and it will never forget me. My name is Ethan Morris, and this happened when I was 29. I had recently moved near a small town in Ontario, looking for a quiet place to hike and escape the chaos of city life. One trail, called Red Pine Trail, was notorious among locals for its eerie isolation and strange disappearances. But I had laughed off the warnings. The first day on the trail was peaceful. The red pines towered above me, sunlight filtering through the needles, and the forest seemed alive in a comforting way. But as I ventured deeper, I noticed something odd. Everything sounded muted. The rustle of leaves, the call of distant birds, even my own footsteps seemed swallowed by the air. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low, and the shadows of the pines stretched unnaturally. That's when I saw it. A figure standing between the trunks, pale, still, and unmoving. When I blinked, it vanished. I called out, thinking it was another hiker, but there was no answer. Only silence so deep it felt physical. My heart raced, and I tried to shake off the unease. I continued down the trail, telling myself it was a trick of light, a shadow, anything but what it might really be. Minutes later, the trail seemed different. Branches and rocks that weren't there before now obstructed my path. The forest itself felt alive, shifting subtly as if guiding me somewhere I didn't want to go. The air turned damp, carrying a faint smell of decay. Then I heard whispers, soft at first, like someone muttering behind a tree. I froze. The voice, faint but intelligible, repeated my name. Ethan. Ethan. I spun around, flashlight in hand, but the trail behind me looked endless, twisting into impossible directions. Something was here, waiting, patient, feeding on fear. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my legs refused to obey. I forced myself to keep moving, stumbling along the trail as the forest seemed to close in around me. Every step felt heavier, like the ground itself was trying to hold me back. The trees loomed taller, their red needles forming dark, jagged shadows that twisted unnaturally in the dim light. Then I saw it again. A figure, pale and motionless, standing between two massive pines. This time, it moved just as I blinked, disappearing behind a cluster of trees. My pulse raced, and I realized with horror that I had no idea which direction I had come from. Every turn looked identical. Gnarled roots, towering red pines, dense undergrowth, and shadows that seemed to twist toward me. The whispers returned, louder now, echoing in my mind. You shouldn't be here. Stay forever. I spun in a circle trying to locate an exit, but the trail had vanished, replaced by endless forest. Panic began to claw at me. I was lost, truly lost, and not in the way a hiker loses a path. I was lost in something far older and darker. I tried to call out again, my voice barely carrying through the thick, heavy air. The whispers answered, not from a source, but from everywhere, as if the forest itself was speaking directly into my mind. Each word chilled me. Do not leave. Your place is here. I stumbled deeper, branches clawing at my face and arms. The pale figure appeared again, closer now, gliding silently toward me. It had no features, just a thin, elongated body and limbs bent at impossible angles. The air around it shimmered, fog curling unnaturally, bending reality like heat over asphalt. And I could feel a weight pressing down, urging me to kneel, to obey. Fear and confusion warred within me. The trail I thought I had memorized was gone, replaced by an endless labyrinth of identical trees and shadows. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my legs moved as if puppeted, drawn deeper into the forest. I realized then that Red Pine Trail wasn't just a place, it was a trap, patient, sentient, and eager for its next victim. I kept moving, though every step felt heavier, the forest seeming to resist me. Shadows twisted in the corners of my vision, elongated and pale, almost like fingers reaching for me. The whispers grew louder, circling my head, repeating my name and phrases I didn't want to hear. Ethan, do not leave. You belong. Then I saw them. More figures, pale and faceless, gliding between the trees, their bodies bending in unnatural ways. They didn't run or chase, but each step I took seemed to make them move closer, like magnets drawn to my presence. My breath came in ragged gasps, and panic threatened to overwhelm me. Somewhere in the distance, I glimpsed a faint light. The trail back, maybe, or another trap. I didn't know, but I ran toward it, crashing through undergrowth and tangled roots, the whispers following, persistent, insistent, patient. Red Pine Trail wasn't just a forest. It was alive, aware, and it had marked me. There would be no simple escape. I reached the faint light, hoping it was the end of the nightmare. But it wasn't. The clearing opened into an unnatural expanse where the trees stretched impossibly tall, their branches intertwining above like a suffocating ceiling. The ground rippled subtly, and the mist thickened into a solid wall, curling around me like a living entity. The whispers intensified, now a chorus surrounding me. Your place is here. Stay. Forever. I saw the pale figures waiting in the shadows, motionless, yet radiating an unmistakable hunger. One glided forward, closer than any before, its faceless head tilting toward me. The forest itself seemed to pulse with anticipation, its energy drawing me in, crushing my will to resist. I realized then that Red Pine Trail didn't just consume the lost. It fed on fear, curiosity, and hesitation. It wasn't just a location. It was a predator, patient and timeless, ready to trap anyone who dared enter its depths. I had been caught, but somehow my story had begun. I stood frozen in the clearing, my flashlight flickering weakly as the pale figures advanced silently, gliding over the forest floor. The whispers were now deafening in my mind, swirling into a cacophony of voices, all repeating the same command. Stay. You belong. Forever. Every instinct screamed to run, yet my legs felt paralyzed, rooted to the ground. I could see the forest around me shift, trees bending slightly, the mist curling unnaturally to guide me toward the figures. Panic surged, but I forced my feet to move, inching backward, my heart pounding like a drum in the suffocating silence. Then, one figure separated from the group, moving closer, its limbs bending in impossible ways, faceless head tilting toward me. It didn't speak, but I could feel its intent, a cold, patient awareness. I realized with terror that Red Pine Trail wasn't just alive. It was aware of me, feeding on my fear, and it was drawing me closer to a fate I couldn't escape. Desperation overtook me, and I bolted, crashing through the undergrowth, branches lashing my face and hands. The forest twisted unnaturally around me, trails looping impossibly, leading nowhere familiar. The whispers followed, a constant pressure in my mind, echoing every step. Do not leave. Your place is here. Through the haze of fear, I glimpsed a faint clearing ahead, and I ran toward it, my lungs burning. But when I arrived, it wasn't an exit. It was another trap. The ground rippled as though alive, and the pale figures waited, circling in silence. Their faceless heads tilted in unison, watching, waiting. I stumbled and fell, the mist curling around me like icy fingers, holding me in place. It dawned on me with paralyzing dread that the trail didn't want me to escape. It wanted me to remember, to fear, to feed its endless hunger. Red Pine Trail wasn't a place. It was a predator, and I had walked right into its jaws. I forced myself to crawl forward, each movement slow and agonizing, the mist pressing against me like a living wall. The whispers were unbearable now, a chorus of voices demanding obedience. Stay. Join us. Forever. Through the swirling fog, I glimpsed movement. Figures drifting silently, limbs bending unnaturally, faceless heads tilting in unison. They surrounded me, circling closer and closer, yet never touching. I realized the forest itself was part of them, the trees bending subtly toward me, the ground shifting to guide me where it wanted. Panic surged through me, but I could not escape their awareness. Then, from the center of the clearing, a larger figure emerged, taller, more distorted, and somehow commanding the others. Its presence was oppressive, filling the space, bending reality. I understood then the horrifying truth. Red Pine Trail didn't just take the lost, it hunted the curious, trapping them in fear and feeding on their terror until nothing remained but whispers and shadows. I scrambled to my feet, knowing instinctively that running might be futile, yet compelled by the raw need to survive. I sprinted blindly through the forest, branches lashing my face, roots threatening to trip me, mist swirling thick and suffocating. The whispers pursued me relentlessly, echoing inside my skull. Do not leave. Your place is here. Forever. Hours, or perhaps minutes, passed in a blur, the trail never straightening, the forest never ending. I don't know how, but eventually I emerged at the edge of the woods, breathless, soaked, and shaking. The sun was rising, the red pines swaying normally, the forest calm, as if nothing had happened. I drove away immediately, heart hammering, never looking back. But even now, I feel it. A tug, a pull whenever I think of those trees. Red Pine Trail waits for the next curious soul, patient and eternal, feeding on fear and leaving only whispers behind.